In this video, I have put together over an hour of Final Fantasy XIV content, all focused on new and returning players to help bring you up to speed on everything from basic tips and tricks to dailies and weeklies. I also talk about what not to do, what I do differently, and the websites and tools I use to make my experience so much more enjoyable. It's been a pleasure making content like this over the past year, and I hope you all enjoy. In total, I have 37 tips and tricks that you may not have known, some of which the game never really even tells you about. They cover topics from combat to crafting and from ease of use to quality of life improvements. So let's dive in. My first tip is a very simple one, but one that is easy to forget. If the bubbles on the bottom right hand of your screen are white, that means the spirit bond level is maxed out. I'm not talking about the 4 giant squares. Rather, I'm talking about the 2 lines next to it. That's your gear. If you're like me, you always forget to extract your materia and reset the spirit bond. Sure, there's that little animation that plays, which is what usually reminds me, but if all of them are maxed out, there's nothing to play and you can go weeks without realizing it. But it turns out the status of your gear is on your screen 100% of the time, and there's really no excuse. If one of those green bubbles turns white, that means your gear is ready for extraction. It's amazingly simple, yet something I completely forgot about until someone in one of my video comments was like, "Hello?" Speaking of, one of the things that I always did when there was something to extract, I would open my character sheet, right-click on the item, extract materia, accept, etc., go through each piece of gear. Turns out, you don't have to do that. Instead, go into your general actions and drag the extraction hotkey onto your bar. Clicking it will show you all of the gear you have, including the ones equipped in your armory chest and in your inventory, and let you extract them all without having to examine the status of each piece of gear. By default, it tells you what percentage it's at, so if you want to go in there and, add 2 percentage points just so you can get the materia, go for it. Now, a dip into the settings. Final Fantasy can get really busy, especially in high-level content. I really do recommend turning off or limiting most ally spell effects. Leave the crucial ones on so you can see healing fields and such. But as a whole, you really don't need to see all of my Dragoon explosions and dragons as I send them out during my rotations. Turn them off and make your life a little easier. Not only is it more readable, but your computer will thank you as well. Now, maybe this isn't for everyone. Some people like to manually control where they go. But 90% of the time, I'm using autorun just by clicking a button on the side of my mouse. Hotkey it to whatever you'd like, but setting up autorun lets you poke around in your inventory, move your skills, or anything else while you're trudging through empty hallways and dungeons, or literally anywhere else. It can be super useful when you're trying not to be left behind. For that reason alone, I recommend having it available even if you don't use it all the time. You've probably heard this a few times, but if you're new, remember to check your achievements for rewards. The game showers you with achievements. Make sure to open the tab, put on all of the filters, and check all the ones you've earned that have rewards. Lots come with different things, from mounts to titles to glamour pieces. There's so much in there, and you don't want to miss out. This is the basics of the basics. And I'm pretty sure the game explains it at some point, but maybe it's just so easy to forget over hundreds of hours. Lots of players like to focus on the main story quests exclusively as they play through the game. While you're going from zone to zone, you'll notice there are yellow and blue quest markers around as well. Those yellow markers are well and truly just side quests, which provide little reward and are mostly about the zone story. Blue quests, however, always unlock some kind of new feature. That can be things like a tribal quest, a new dungeon, a new raid, the Dome and Enclave, its Guardian Restoration, the list goes on and on. So, in short, if you want to unlock new stuff, go do blue quests. I am constantly surprised by how few people click on the individual timers in the Timers tab. Most of these can be clicked on to provide more details, from the specific housing plot you bid on, to what the current supply and provisioning missions are, to what every single custom delivery vendor is looking for this week. It's super handy and will save you a bunch of time in the long run. Just open them if they have that little icon and save yourself that time. So if you're not a crafter, there's really nothing you can do about this unless you have a friend who's willing to help. But if you have the skills, or a friend who has the skills, it's always better to repair your gear by hand rather than spending gil at the mender. For a long time I knew it was cheaper, like it would save me money. But that's not all it really does, because when gear is manually fixed, it gains 100% durability from whatever it's at, up to the cap of 200%, rather than the 100% that menders will do, which makes it so you don't have to repair as frequently. Another thing that not everyone understands is how the game handles alt classes. Technically, it is more time efficient to level up one class a bunch and then go back and revisit old classes. That's because Final Fantasy provides a 100% XP bonus to any combat job that is lower than their max job level. For example, if you have a combat class at 90, all of your other classes will receive a 100% XP bonus from level 1 to 79, though that does drop down to 50% from 80 to 90. However, this only applies to XP from defeating enemies, battlecraft lead quests, fates, duty roulettes, and deep dungeons. Now, some of you may like the more traditional movement settings, but one of the first things I recommend you do is go to your character configuration and swap movement settings from character-based to camera-based. The default setting makes it so that when you press S, your character walks backwards slowly, which certainly isn't ideal in combat. Camera-based movement makes it so that when you hit S, your character turns around and runs towards the camera, which I think is far more intuitive and also easier. Another kind of hole that I fell into was the way I handled teleporting. For a long time, I would fast travel by clicking on the minimap and then navigating that way, zooming out to the world and then back into where I wanted to go. Do yourself a favor and just hotkey the teleport menu. It's so much easier, displays every location and price, and getting used to it will save you a ton of time. You can even set up your Aetheryte ticket usage here, so if you wanted to automatically redeem whenever something costs more than 1,000 gil, whatever that is, you can do it there. So much easier. Now this isn't so much of a tip as it is just like an acknowledgement that it exists. You can maybe turn the combat music off. I mean, I love the music of Final Fantasy XIV, especially the various zone themes. But that constantly gets interrupted by generic combat music, so I went ahead and turned it off. Even if you turn off the normal battle music, you still get the special boss themes and dungeons and stuff, so you really aren't missing out. I don't know, it's not like a huge game-changing tip, but like, sometimes I just want to hear my zone music even when I'm in combat, alright? One really good tip for new players is to turn off the box that stores all of your newly obtained items in the armory chest. In short, that's the place where if you click recommended gear, the game will automatically pull from anything's in there and optimize your loadout. So obviously you don't want stuff in there that you're never going to use, and there's so little space, like 35 slots for each piece. It also leads to confusion where you could possibly end up getting rid of gear that you actually need. So rather than dealing with that, turning this setting off makes it so that all of your gear drops go to your inventory instead. Then, after finishing your activity, you can evaluate each piece, sending the ones you want to your armory chest and leaving the rest in your inventory to be sold, broken down, or exchanged for seals. It just saves you a lot of brain space. You don't have to keep track of like what's new, what's not new, what do I need to look at. They're conveniently sorted into two piles and you can just do whatever you need to do. You may have noticed, if you're new to the game, that if you go to log out anywhere that's not a city, there's like a 20-second logout queue. Like, wait. That's there for a variety of reasons, but you really don't want to log out there because when you log in, chances are your XP bar at the bottom is green and showing a moon. This means you're well rested and will receive a 50% bonus to all XP you earn until you exceed that green bar. That bar only increases if you log out in sanctuaries like cities and near aetherites. So make sure you always log out in one of those areas, and the way you can tell if it's one of those areas is if you don't have that logout queue. If you're constantly spamming duty roulettes, chances are you're tired of watching or skipping the same cutscenes over and over and over. In your character configuration setting, there's actually an entire section dedicated to cutscene skipping. You can skip all previous viewed scenario cutscenes like dungeons and transportation videos. You can skip it all. No need to wait for it to load, hit escape. The game will just plop you right back in instead. This is the shortest tip in the entire video, mostly because I feel like it took me a long time to learn this, but whether you're sitting or standing, you can just type cpose/cpose, that is, in chat to change what pose you're in. There's even a setting in the settings that randomizes that pose for you after a short period of time, making it so that you change stances somewhat naturally. Just convenient to know if you want to use it, I guess. Moving on. So the default setting of Final Fantasy makes it so that your inventory is in like 4 different tabs, right? But why is it in tabs really? Just to take up less screen space? I don't know. But either way, it just takes time to look between them. You end up going back and forth, so why not just show it all at once? Go to your item settings, swap the inventory interface to open all, and then you can see all 4 tabs at once. I always like to include this tip just because like I fundamentally underestimated, even as someone who is very into optimization and XP and leveling, I really underestimated how useful duty roulettes are for your combat jobs. From an absolute perspective, the main story roulette gives about 50% of an XP bar, half a level. An alliance raid gives 40%, leveling roulettes give about 40% as well. The 50, 60, 70 roulettes give 20%, and trials give about 14%. Normal raids are much, much worse at like 6. If time efficiency is your thing, however, trials give almost 5% of an XP bar per minute, thanks to some really, really short early game trials. Leveling gives 2.7, Alliance gives 2.4. The main story gives 1.4, and it just gets lower from there. They're on screen. Just look at them. I read them, and it's sounding mind-numbing. Just look at the screen. That's the most efficient stuff. Prioritize as you will, but don't skip out on doing at least a few of them. They're super useful, especially when you get to later levels, because 50% of a level 81 bar is a hell of a lot more XP than 50% of a level 2 bar, right? If you're into earning in-game rewards, there are a ton that are locked behind MGP and the Gold Saucer dailies and weeklies. And those are an easy way to get them. At a minimum, do your mini Cactpot scratch-offs each day, and then do the fashion report and jumbo Cactpot at the end of each week as well. In total, you should earn about 75,000 MGP per week with little to no effort. Bonus points if you use the boost from Squadron or your free company. Now, as someone who tried working with the default key bindings, my hands started to hurt pretty fast. Using the regular keys and then shift plus those keys and then control plus those keys, it sucked. After some experimenting, as you may have noticed, I now use 1 through 5 and then Q, E, R, F, and G. My next bar is shift plus all of those, with my final bar being 6, 7, 8, 9, and then the dash. By no means am I a super hardcore DPS with an optimized rotation, tracking my uptime and stuff like that, but at a minimum, find something that works for your hands, because the defaults don't work for everyone. There will be something more comfortable, and even after 600 hours like I did, you can learn to switch. You can, and your hands will thank you for it. Gardening tip. If you're going on vacation and taking a break from Final Fantasy, but are worried about your plants dying, put those garden patches into housing storage. Doing so pauses the current timers. While they won't continue to grow, they also won't waste away and die. Save your jute. Put them in storage. If you're very early in the game and really don't know how to get any kind of mounts and want to earn them for yourself rather than buying them off the market, head on over to the achievement vendor in Gridania. He has 3 mounts, which you can get fairly easily just by exchanging some achievement points, which you earn automatically, and then you just have to talk to him. Those include the Behemoth, the Ahriman, and the Deathclaw. Those were my first 3 mounts. They're very easy to get. Go ahead and get them, add them to your collection so you're not just limited to the default Chocobo. You know, I see a lot of people completely ignore grand companies. By all means, you can. But I recommend everyone unlocks grand companies and then do the supply and provisioning missions, since they're an incredibly underrated method of grinding your crafting and gathering classes. Essentially, every day the company will ask for a specific item or items, depending on your class's level, from each of the various crafting and gathering classes. Oftentimes, these can be purchased on a market board for low prices, or you can visit another server for even cheaper prices and then just turn them in for a quick XP farm. As a reminder, high quality items are worth double the XP in seals, and starred items are worth even more. Just try to do as many as you can. You don't have to break the bank. Again, you can hop on over to Universalist to check markets on your data center and beyond. Although I never stress about it that much. Just do it when it's convenient for you. Craft it, buy it, whatever you need to do. Just know they're there. They're an excellent way to grind those crafting and gatherings. I've said this in another video, but I ranked up every single one of those classes to 70 without ever having done any outside grinding. I literally did it through just that. Though most of it, like 80% of it, was spent simply, purchasing the items I needed, since I'm kind of into money making as it is. If you don't have money, you can craft them yourself. Whatever is convenient. Just know they're there, know that they're good, do them. When you're doing that, another tip I have, you can use this only sometimes. I don't know why it's not everywhere, but one of the big pain points when doing things like the supply and provisioning missions is writing in the item name, like searching it, typing it in. It's hard to remember sometimes. Thankfully, with supply and provisioning missions and with even some other things, you can just right click it and then copy the item name and then paste that into the market board or your recipes or wherever it is. You don't have to type it in. Weirdly enough, this isn't available everywhere for some reason, but just know that it's sometimes there and you can sometimes count on it. Pretty early on, Final Fantasy introduces you to desynthesis. And I remember spending a ton of time trying to figure out like what that was. How can I earn money doing it? Is it worth like all these things, Googling all this stuff. It's especially complicated because like in the past it was worth it, but like there are all these posts from like 2015, 2016, like, oh yeah, do it. Oh, and then the recent ones tell you not to do it. But in short, it's probably not worth leveling up. It can be, somewhat useful to get rare raid materials when breaking down raid weapons, but outside of that, it's largely just going to cause you to sacrifice a bunch of items that you would otherwise sell for seals or gil. So don't feel any kind of pressure to level it up. So let's say you send out a retainer, and that retainer brings back a material that you've never heard of. You don't know how to get it, nothing. What do you craft with it? If you're ever not sure what to do with a particular material, just right click it and search for recipes. The game will then show you all of the recipes you have access to so you can put it to good use. Like I said, this is especially useful for rare materials that like make level 1 glamour gear items, the ones that are worth like 10, 20, 100,000 gil. That way you can figure out if you want to sell it or if you want to save up a few of them and craft them into something worth even more. On that note, for any item that can be crafted, you can simply right-click it and open the recipe tree and the raw materials list. This will then let you make sure that you have all of the needed materials before you start crafting. You can even input how many you want. Like, you want to make 50 of these things, it'll tell you, oh, you need like 600 ore, that kind of thing. Then you can move over to the recipe tree and craft all of the prerequisite items before moving on to the final stages and finally crafting the item. You ever walk around Gridania, Limsa, wherever, and see people with weapons glowing on their back? For the longest time, and by the longest time I mean until like 2 weeks ago, I just thought I didn't have a weapon capable of that yet. Even if they glow while they're equipped, whenever I would put them away, they weren't. I was like, oh, I guess I just don't have one that glows on my back. Nope. Turns out, it's just a bug that you can take advantage of with a macro. It's simple, just type in /mb/sit/wait1/sit. Execute that. Now your weapon will glow on your back. Another kind of quick tip is that, like, sometimes it's perfectly fine to do content unsynced. I remember when I first started, I only wanted to do content genuinely. You know, I wanted to beat it for real. Like, why unsync things? But it's particularly hard to do some of that old stuff, especially from like Realm Reborn and earlier, because they're not super popular activities anymore outside of people doing their roulettes. So if you ever need to do something like one of the Realm Reborn trials or Wondrous Tales or something like that, ultimately you could do this with dungeons too. I've just never done it with dungeons, but you can do it with dungeons. If you're powerful enough to do so and you don't care about enemy loot drops, go ahead and run it unsynced. If you just want to get it out of the way, like the queue is like 16 minutes. It'll take me like 2 minutes to run through it myself. I'll just unsync it. You'll still get the chests, but you skip the mindless ad killing. So just don't feel guilty about doing it, really, is all I'm saying, because it's common. I know a lot of people don't really poke around in that area of the duty roulette settings, but you can also level limit your roulettes. So if you're tired of doing the same introductory dungeons over and over, you can turn on limited leveling roulette, and the game will only choose duties that are within 8 levels of the lowest character in your party. For example, if you're level 70, nothing below level 63 will ever be chosen. It's super handy for when you're tired of doing all the old stuff and just want to play some of the newer content again. On the other hand, it may increase your wait time, especially for DPS. But if you're on a tank or a healer, turn it on. You ever want to just like stop and smell the flowers in the dungeons, look around, examine the scenery? Turns out you can do that. Just turn on Explorer mode, it's in this setting here too, and then you can load into your favorite dungeon. There you're free to G-pose and take pictures. You can even summon a striking dummy to get your Warrior of Light in some combat poses and then make it invisible. In G-pose, it's kind of great. There's some really beautiful places. Might as well take some pictures there, right? I covered this one just a few weeks ago in a dedicated new DPS players video. But if you're a melee DPS, learn the difference between flank and rear. Some of your abilities require you to be behind the target, others require you to be in the flank, which is actually off to either side. So learn the difference between those two, learn which skills require that. And to maximize your DPS, you want to be in the positions when casting the ability. There's no need to wait in the animation. And because you're frequently bouncing back and forth between these two areas, it's common for melee DPS to stay right where the two zones meet, moving back and forth as needed. On that note, you may find yourself wondering, well, there's like the circle's different. There's no rear, there's no flank, it's just completely closed and the arrows inside the circle. That means positionals don't matter. You don't need to bother moving between flank and the rear. You don't have to move, try to optimize your positioning. Just get to the safest spot and focus on your rotation. All of that stuff will activate as per normal. This is even true for when the boss is so big there's only a half circle. You don't have to worry about where you are attacking the boss. Everything will still count. Again, if you watched my new DPS tips video. A lot of this stuff at the end here is going to be a repeat, but damage happens based on the indicators, not on the animations. Essentially, the damage and effect of enemy abilities are applied when the cast time finishes and the AoE disappears, not when the animation plays. The second that AoE disappears, you're safe to jump back in and do more damage, even if the actual animation is just starting. As a note, this is also true for you. You don't need to wait on animations to finish casting. Damage is applied as soon as you click the button. If the next ability in your rotation is up, you're free to move on. It might not seem like much, but removing 1 or 2 seconds between every ability over the course of a long boss fight or a dungeon can make a really big difference. I didn't know this was a thing for the longest time, so chances are, new players might not either. You see that party list in the top left of your screen? Chances are the tank holds aggro. In this case, it's a healer, but whoever holds aggro is currently displayed as an A. But should something happen to that person, like is it a tank, should they die, the enemy assigns priority based on who is drawing the most aggro, and that's indicated by like 2, 3, 4, etc. The bar under this shows how close you are to taking aggro, and this listing is essentially a de facto way of seeing how much damage you're doing in comparison to the other DPS characters in the party. While there's no true DPS meter and DPS tracking apps are against the terms of service, you can kind of see how good you're doing based on the aggro meter and the party list. So you're starting to think about playing Final Fantasy XIV, but find yourself wondering just how long it'll take. It's an MMO and those are notoriously time consuming, and 14 especially so given all you've heard about the story and cutscenes, but how long will it take exactly? How quickly can you rush through? I remember when I was trying to push my way through all of this, A Realm Reborn, all of the expansions to try and finally get caught up with all my friends, and it took ages. So one thing I wanted to do was dig into just how time consuming it is. The website How Long to Beat lets people track how long it took them to finish a game. 181 people have reported that just doing the A Realm Reborn main story takes on average 100 hours. Want to do some extras like more important blue quests? That jumps up to 486 hours according to the 197 reports. When it comes to expansions, it also says Heavensward takes 68 hours, Stormblood 60, Shadowbringer 60, and Endwalker 50. None of that is including the post-expansion patches. Now, I'll spare you all of the math, but adding everything together on How Long to Beat, just on the main story-focused questline, takes on average 477 hours. One of the reasons it's so time-consuming are all of the cutscenes. A Reddit user by the name of Cyberpunk3 has tracked cutscene time for a, long time, though they've quit doing it with the release of patch 6.3. So assuming you leave text on auto advance, you can expect to spend 15 hours watching cutscenes in A Realm Reborn, and then another 9 hours in the post-ARR patches. So already you've spent 24 hours watching cutscenes, longer than most straightforward non-RPG games are these days. Final Fantasy is time-consuming. Heavensward has 8 hours of cutscenes in both the main expansion and the post-Heavensward quests, which is 16 more hours, bringing us to a total of 40. In Stormblood, the split is 11 to 9, 20 additional hours for a total of 60. We still have 2 expansions to go, and already that number is really, really high. If any game told you that there were 60 hours of cutscenes, you would balk, probably. And as a reminder, this number only includes the MSQ and key side content like Hildebrand, Relic Weapon quests, Role quests, and the Alliance raid. Basically, all of the big stuff, no side quests. In Shadowbringers, these numbers start to get a bit ridiculous. 15 hours of cutscenes during MSQ, which is followed up by 13 hours during the post-Shadowbringers activities. 28 hours for a total of 88. And then we have Endwalker, which has nearly 24 hours of cutscenes just in the main story itself, which already brings us to 112 hours. In that much time, I could have started and completed Persona 5 Royal, And during that time, I was doing nothing but reading text, not even playing. Obviously, if you're mainlining MSQ, you don't see nearly this many cutscenes. But if you're going to get into it, expect to spend at least 100 to 200 hours, assuming you never get sidetracked. If not, up to 400. In the end, Final Fantasy XIV will take however long you want it to take. I'm 1900 hours in, and the list of things I want to do hasn't really shrunk all that much. I still don't even have all of my classes leveled up. In short, after 1,000 hours, there were a lot of things I wish I did differently when I first started playing. And I don't mean things like daily quests that I should have grinded. I covered that stuff last week. No, what I'm talking about this time is playing the game to make it as enjoyable as possible for you specifically. Whatever that looks like. For context, when I started playing the game, I had friends that were way farther along than I was. Some were in Stormblood, others were tackling the then newly released Endwalker, and meanwhile I was just getting my legs in Gridania, and let me tell you, I was taking my time. Back then I was doing what I found to be most enjoyable, which meant doing all of the main quests in a zone until it asks me to go somewhere else. Before moving on, I'd do every single zone quest. And yes, that means both the blue and the yellow ones. As you can imagine, that's pretty time consuming. A whole lot of people have never done those quests. And at the time, with pressure from friends to hurry up and get caught up so we could play together, it did feel like a slog sometimes. Eventually, after clearing all of the Realm Reborn zones and starting Heavensward, I gave in and started doing MSQ every single time I played, which meant completely ignoring not only the yellow quests, but the blue ones too. In looking back, some of my fondest memories are clearing Gridania, Lenosha, and Thanalin. With those quests, you get so much more lore and backstory, and just general immersion when you're dealing with zones one by one. And it also just gives everything time to breathe. As someone who eventually started rushing MSQ, I really didn't even get to exist in the world as the story beats happened. There was always something I had to rush off to next. And now that I'm returning, the quests feel pretty hollow, you know? My Warrior of Light has done so much now. It's unfortunate, but going back to Heavensward and dealing with the Dragon War feels like nothing compared to the stakes in Endwalker. So my first recommendation is that. Play the game how you like. Don't let friends try and rush you through every expansion just so you can play together. For one, they can absolutely level sync and play with you. But also, you aren't going to miss that much by taking your time. FOMO isn't a big thing in Final Fantasy. Everything will be there waiting for you whenever you get to it. The second thing I do differently comes thanks of Elder Scrolls Online, which does not have flying mounts. As someone who started with Elder Scrolls Online before transitioning over to Final Fantasy XIV, I knew that they were standard in other MMOs and was part of the group begging for ZeniMax Online Studios to add them to the game. Finally getting one in Final Fantasy felt so good. But it's not until you get your hands on one and have had experience with a game where you're forced to stay grounded that you realize the harm that they cause. Once I unlocked flying, whatever zone I was in became arbitrary. No matter how interesting the landscape is, you take off, turn on autofly, and wait to arrive. Everything is flyover country. There's nothing, you're not even bothering to look at stuff. In Elder Scrolls Online, you can't really do that. Every movement around the world is by hand and you have to pay attention. And ultimately, it's so much more immersive and really forces you to become more knowledgeable about the zones you're in, and not just the hotspots where activities take place. So all that said, give it a shot. Don't make a friend rush in and chauffeur you to all of the Aether Currents. Try to earn them yourselves, and even then, consider staying grounded. It's a much more immersive experience. The final thing I'd change is to be less afraid of switching classes. I don't know about you, but I arbitrarily picked Lancer when I first started just because the endgame gear looked good. And despite the fact that it was an arbitrary pick, I basically felt locked into it for my entire playthrough. Not only is that a waste of XP because the MSQ gives you more XP than one class requires to level to 90, but also there's nothing to be afraid of. If I was so tired of Melee DPS, which I was, why couldn't I have just switched to Archer or Bard at any given moment? For some reason I had convinced myself that I would be bad at the new class and it would cost me DPS, which would make people angry, so I should just stick it out and wait. But you can't wait forever. Eventually you're going to hit 90 and probably want to try other classes. You might know the dungeons and activities better, but you're still going to be learning a new class. Your DPS is going to be affected regardless, no matter when you try to learn. And let's be realistic, most of the Final Fantasy community doesn't care how good or bad you are. As long as you communicate, so many people in this game are forgiving and understanding. So do yourself a favor and try another class or two when you're starting out, even if you don't stick with them. And that's especially true if you're a DPS and are considering trying healer or tank. Having one of those classes is really super helpful for when you don't feel like waiting in the abysmal solo DPS queues. If you are new to Final Fantasy XIV, you may be surprised at how nice everyone is. Zone chat isn't full of people arguing. No one is complaining about you not doing enough damage. The list goes on and on. But it turns out all of that is true thanks to some really stringent rules Square Enix has imposed. So if you're coming from an MMO like Elder Scrolls Online or World of Warcraft and are just starting out, make sure you never do these 6 things. Unlike WoW and ESO, mods are strictly against the Final Fantasy XIV terms of service. Even if you aren't using them, don't talk about mods in chat. You could absolutely get banned. I would say you shouldn't use mods. Honestly, plenty of people do use them, of course, since Square can't really tell if people do have them installed. But everyone who does has to keep them secret or risk their account getting suspended. But the reason I said you shouldn't talk about mods is because you might honestly think it's harmless. Plug-in talk is common in Elder Scrolls Online, but don't migrate that habit here. Another thing you shouldn't do is DPS check people. Again, there's a reason no one is constantly complaining about you not doing enough damage. It's against the rules. This is also something that falls somewhat under the don't talk about mods thing, because there's no way to track your own DPS, let alone a party member's DPS, without using some kind of extension. And even ignoring the rules of etiquette, never harass someone over their DPS not being high enough. Not only could it imply that you're modding, but it is against the terms of service. This is a more general rule, but you should never be weird in DMs or ERP without consent. It's a rule everywhere, but is particularly a problem in FF14. The Final Fantasy community is horny, it's true. The RP scene is big, particularly on Balmung, but RP should only ever happen with consent. Don't just DM people with weird comments. Just because someone looks like Raha Tia or another one of your favorite characters doesn't mean they're there to RP for you. According to the rules, ERP is acceptable, but can only be done in private areas, and a single report of impropriety is enough to get you suspended. Make sure that everything is done above the board, and you should be fine as long as you're respectful. You also need to be really careful about real money trading. In Elder Scrolls Online, it's really common for someone to give another player gold in exchange for the other person gifting them an item that you can only buy with crowns, their premium currency. But Final Fantasy XIV has no such premium currency, and as a result, the only way to do this would be to pay someone with real money. This is explicitly against the terms of service, and something the devs are the most vocal about banning people for. Don't even risk it. This is a short and simple one, but just don't even talk about politics. I've seen people argue about political stuff in Elder Scrolls Online zone chat plenty of times. It sucks. Don't do it in Final Fantasy XIV. Even basic conversations can get you suspended. It's just against the terms of service. Don't do it. The last one's really broad, and honestly, it's probably why there are so few toxic people on Final Fantasy XIV. Literally anything deemed too negative can get you suspended. This includes words like stupid, idiot, crazy, garbage, and trash. You're not allowed to blame anyone for wiping. You can't ask them how they managed to screw something up. You can't tell someone to quit or change classes because they suck. You can't admonish someone and ask them why they aren't doing this or that. If you aren't making a suggestion and are instead making demands or unconstructive comments, you will get suspended. Keep in mind for all of these, Square says that one report is enough for them to take action. Even if 9 people find what you said or did fine, if one person was uncomfortable and reports you, Square will issue a suspension. Anyway, that's it. Just 6 things to keep in mind while you start your Final Fantasy XIV adventure. It's definitely an adjustment coming from something like Elder Scrolls Online. You kind of just get used to the negativity, used to people talking about their DPS openly, used to talking about mods, used to talking or complaining about you not doing well in veteran dungeons, that kind of thing. None of that can happen here. You literally can't do it. You will get suspended. As someone who started off my Final Fantasy XIV journey as a Lancer, I've spent a lot of time learning the ins and outs of Melee DPS. By no means am I some super pro tier endgame raider who is adept at Savages and Ultimates, but I like to think I have enough experience to offer new DPS players some tips. So in this video, I just wanted to run down some quick tips or tricks that you might not know if you're just starting off in Final Fantasy XIV. I see new players misunderstanding the gaze mechanic a bunch. When an enemy casts gaze, complete with an AoE cone or something like that, you do not need to look away unless you're in the cone. The gaze only applies to those within it, usually the tank, who will promptly move out before it activates. If there is no indicator, then yes, look away. But as a whole, you don't need to stop DPSing just to look away. Keep doing damage unless you're in that cone. As a note, if the boss is big enough, make sure to move out of their hitbox. In most cases, being anywhere within it counts as still looking at the boss, even if your character is facing away. Every time you unlock a new skill, I recommend reading the tooltip, and if you're using a guide, figure out where it slots into your rotation or opener, if at all. Every new ability is an opportunity to improve the damage you're doing, and it's much easier to learn a class as you go, rather than waiting to hit a certain point and then learning a whole bunch of it all at once. Ultimately, the good thing about being a new DPS is that it's the least stressful role. If a healer does poorly, the tank or the entire party can die. If a tank does poorly and overpulls, it can cause the entire party to die. If a DPS does poorly, most of the time the fight will just take longer. As someone whose definition of success is simply not wiping, just relax. I don't care how long a dungeon takes as long as we aren't wiping over and over and over. Focus on learning mechanics, dodging enemy abilities, and going through your rotations as fast as possible. You'll pick up the rest as you go. There are 7 that I found myself wishing I had the discipline to do consistently. There's a whole bunch that I'll pick up, start doing, and just forget to finish by the end of the week. By no means are any of these required, but each offers something really valuable, whether that's XP, guild income, or MGP. So yeah, let's dive in. Let me start by saying the real Wondrous Tales doesn't unlock until you reach the current level cap. Prior to that, Chloe's journals really only include duties at level 60 and below, which kind of scale based on, when you hit 70, 80, that kind of stuff. But you can still get some rewards, they just won't be as good. It's also important to note that every journal is good for 2 weeks, meaning you must complete it within that window or it just expires. That's a good amount of time to do this. However, new journals are available every Tuesday on the weekly reset, so this is actually a weekly activity. Don't just go and finish it and assume you're good for 2 weeks. every Tuesday, there's a new one available. What I want to stress here, in regards to this feature more than anything, is that you shouldn't be afraid of these activities. When I first started out, I thought extremes were too tough, so instead I was grinding the dungeons using my retry points. And that can be a mind-numbing, time-consuming process, when in reality you can complete Wondrous Tales in just a day or two. While this isn't the most optimal way to do it, I think the best way to complete your Wondrous Tales is to do the following. So first of all, assuming you have 9 out of 9 second chance points, do as many of the easy extremes as you can, meaning Howling Eye, Navel, Bowl of Embers, Thorn March, Striking Tree, and Shiva. You can do these uncapped, so hopefully you have a high enough character where you can just solo them and easily defeat them. Once you do all of the ones that you rolled to begin with, pick one to retry using your second chance points. Keep doing this until you have 7 out of 9 seals chosen. At that point, if there is time before the reset, you may want to set it aside while you earn second chance points again, which happens naturally when doing duty roulettes. When you have as many as you're going to get or are back to max at 9 out of 9, go to the link in the description for a Wondrous Tale solver. Input your seal pattern and choose your strategy. I personally use potential lines, as that one prioritizes getting at least 1 line, while also weighing your chances of getting 2 or 3 lines, which would obviously be ideal. The other options prioritize just getting anything, or only 2 or only 3, and discard the other opportunities. I personally think one that takes everything into account is best. So, depending on what it tells you, it may tell you to reroll or to keep it. If it tells you to keep it, go ahead and complete it. If it tells you that shuffling is better, do that and then re-input your seals and repeat until it tells you to stop shuffling. One of the things it will do is, as your points get lower and lower, your second chance points, it'll stop recommending you shuffle just because you don't have a lot of points left. Whenever it does that, I'm not the type of person to sit there and go regrind just so I can make it 100% optimal. I usually just call it quits and then earn my last 2 seals to turn it in. Now the question is, why do you do this? So there are some really good rewards, especially for like 2 or more lines, but it's also about 50% of an XP bar for whatever class you want. For example, I constantly do my journals as Dragoon, then go to Chloe, switch over to Scholar, and claim the XP for that class. It's a super easy way to get some levels without too much effort, without too much grindiness, and it's available every single week. Now the next thing I'm going to recommend comes with a caveat. So even if you aren't super into the endless grind for slightly better gear, like me, like do I really need that plus 10 item level if I'm not really doing endgame content? No. But you should try to get to your weekly cap for the newest tomestones, if only for monetary gain, at least in general. Currently, Allegan Tomestones of Causality are only used to purchase Lunar Envoy gear. Thankfully, Allegan Tomestones of Astronomy have since been uncapped and can now be grinded at will. These can be traded to Sahanti at Radzahan for materials which sell for about 5,000 gil each on my server. Now, that number has obviously decreased a ton over time. At its peak, when Astronomy Tomestones were the rarest, each material was worth 10 to 15k each. And even when they were subject to the 450 weekly cap, that was still 300k a week. Now it's not so impressive, maybe about half of that, but still the opportunity is there. And if you're already level 90, it's a good way of getting your alt classes some of the better gear available without spending a ton of time or a ton of money on the latest crafted set. So while it's not necessarily the newest tomestone right now, when it is, it's absolutely worth doing for the money alone. Aside from containing some really awesome stories and personalities, custom deliveries are a super useful source of white and eventually purple scripts. They're also a super good source of XP for your crafters and gatherers and can help power level those with just a little bit of effort each week. The good news, at least for the crafting classes, and this is something I take advantage of a ton, is that you can make all of the materials that you need as a level 90 armorer, for example, and then turn them in on the class you want to level up. It's important to note that each of the custom delivery vendors does have a level requirement, however, so you need to be smart and think ahead and plan for that. For example, one might require level 56, and if you're 55, you won't be able to turn them in. You'll have to go to the next vendor down, assuming there is a vendor below that. Either way, you can then take those white scripts and use them to make money by purchasing valuable materials from the exchange. Especially around new patches where a lot of that material is needed, you can earn a pretty penny. You can of course use those white scripts to buy mastery books and a whole bunch of other stuff. They're a very, very good way of earning that money. This is essentially the passive way of earning white scripts. Like, do this at a minimum and then spend it as you get it. That way you don't actually have to just sit there and craft stuff to turn in and grind. I've got one more money-making opportunity, which is Domain Enclave. So if you haven't leveled up your Domain Enclave, you really aren't missing a whole lot. If you haven't heard of it, in short, it's just a way to double the value of 20,000 gil worth of items into 40,000 gil, and that's it. But the thing is, it takes at least 14 weeks to level all the way up. You start off with a really low cap of like 1,000 gil, which slowly scales to 20,000. It's super useful for things like Allegan, gold, bronze, etc. pieces that are really only good for selling. And there's a little bit of story there if you're into that. Honestly, it's not huge, but it did feel good to get out of the way. Now we shift on over to the gold saucer. Much like the mini cackpot, which I talked about in the previous video, there's no losing with the jumbo cackpot. You will always earn more MGP than you spend on buying tickets. Each one costs you 100, 150, then 200, and you'll always get at least 1,000 MGP per ticket back for a total of 3,000 per week. And obviously you have a chance at earning 6,000, 58,000, 233,000, or a million MGP depending on how many numbers you get correct. While there's only a 1 in 10,000 chance of winning the lottery, don't let that deter you. If you want the mounts and items that are only available via MGP, you'll need many, many millions of the currency. And this is a very good way of getting some and having a chance at getting very lucky. Also, don't be like me and forget to turn in your tickets after the drawing on Saturday night, but before the next drawing. There's so many times where I just miss the drawing and then the next week comes by and I have tickets that just expire. They just go poof, and you've actually wasted the MGP you spent and the potential winnings. While Cackpot is flashy and has a chance of really raking in the MGP, Fashion Report is essentially old reliable. Every Friday, Kyoko Star on Twitter posts the correct answer to that week's report, telling you exactly how to get the bare minimum 80 points, or 100 if you need that to unlock the vendor. But you should be doing this each week because it rewards a total of 60,000 MGP, which is easily the quickest income for the amount of time spent. And the good news is that most weeks, the clothing requirements aren't super expensive. Most of the time I spend under 5,000 gil to get the optimal amount of points. Do note that if you have a free company with the unlocked buffs or MGP increasing buffs, like the Gold Saucer VIP card squadrons, make sure to use them. They apply to activities like this. Since they last for a few hours, I usually wait until Saturday night, activate one of those, then go to the Gold Saucer to do my mini cackpot, jumbo cackpot, and fashion report, all with the buff. 15% across all of those does add up. My final recommendation is one that is only for dedicated players. As someone who was once intimidated by Eureka and everything it entails, you can massively speed up the progress by just making an effort to do the weekly challenges. They grant a ton of experience and are honestly the fastest way to level up, especially if you aren't in a rush and can just do these each week. I personally went in there just grinding enemies thinking that was the best way, not even knowing that there were challenges, but they're there, you just have to look for them. Do them each week and you'll get there. The grind to max level in Eureka is really, really long, but a one-time thing. So do these each week if you're interested and minimize that painful ad grinding. Now that I'm 1,000 hours in, I find myself wishing I had given them more attention in the past. So I figured it'd be a good thing to share with you all. Let me start off with the one I ignored the most, my leveling roulettes. Rather than take advantage of a big daily treasure trove of XP, I instead just focused on doing main story quests and unlocking new activities. But it turns out once you do all of that, you're back to needing a ton of XP if you want to max out your other combat classes. The MSQ essentially offers 2 full rank ups. So pro tip, level up 2 classes at a time. I only did 1 and wasted a ton of XP. But either way, take it from me and squeeze these roulettes in whenever you can, especially if you're one of the classes in need like a healer or a tank. I specifically recommend the leveling roulette, the trials roulette, and the frontlines roulette, as those tend to give the most XP per minute. You can usually get all of those done in under an hour, which is pretty great. Anything beyond that, like the main story, roulettes, and all that stuff, should be saved for dedicated grinding sessions. It's always a good option to have though, because I'm very much over grinding the same 10 Palace of the Dead levels over and over. At the very least, if you do your leveling roulettes as much as possible from the moment you start the game, you'll spread out the pain and actually do something different most of the time. On the other side of the coin is something I did a ton of, and it made my life so much easier. As soon as you can, unlock your Grand Company and do the supply and provisioning missions. They're an incredibly underrated method of grinding your crafting and gathering classes. Every day it will ask you for a specific item or items depending on your class's level, and oftentimes these can just be purchased on the market board for incredibly low prices and quickly turned in as a really fast XP farm. Keep in mind that high quality items are worth double the XP in seals, so if there's a HQ version for cheap, get that. And start items are worth even more. At a minimum, I try to turn in the start items each day. They're just so valuable for so little time. If you have the money to spare, just do it. If you find the item is too expensive on your market board, look into crafting it yourself or hop on over to Universalist to check the markets on your data center and beyond. By doing these turn-ins, I ranked up every single one of my crafting and gathering classes to level 70 without ever having done any outside grinding. Granted, that is over months and months, but 80% of that progress was spent simply purchasing the items I needed and never really needing to do anything painful. Oh, and stop trudging back and forth between the marketplace and the Grand Company rep. Just check your timers. The list is right there. You can even open it while you're in the market board. Another thing I recommend, whether you have 2 or 8 retainers, is to send them out. Send them out. Even if you don't upgrade their gear as they level up because it's too expensive, the grind to level 90 is long and the increased odds of a venture coffer is very, very far away when you first start. You'll thank yourself down the line if you ever do get into gathering and don't feel like going out to get the materials yourself as well. Pro tip, if you're going to be around for at least 3 to 4 hours, send your retainers on quick ventures and send them back as soon as they return. If you can't do that, it's better to send them on those longer 18-hour ventures because those give roughly the same XP as 3 quick ventures. I'll also be the first to admit that I have never used leaves enough. I still don't. I was happy enough with my passive supply and provisioning missions that I never really bothered with these. Looking back though, I have basically just left an incredible amount of money on the table. And that's of course ignoring the valuable XP that they offer. In particular, the alchemy and culinarian leaves are usually worth time grinding for cash. Some of these can earn you 3,000 to 6,000 gold per, which doesn't sound like much, but if your pockets are empty, it does end up being around 500,000 gil per maxed out guild leave limit. So just don't leave that on the table like I did. Grind it, earn money, earn the XP, level up your classes. The last one is more of a matter of spreading a painful grind over as much time as possible. You don't really need to do this every day, but you should try to when you can. Because once you beat MSQ and you start to want to explore other systems like tribal quests, there's nothing more painful than spending a full month trying to complete just the tribes from A Realm Reborn. The rewards are small, but they are exclusive, unless you want to dump some gold onto the marketplace, so try to get into the habit of squeezing these in when you can. because when you want to have them done and unlocked, you'll find yourself suddenly needing to focus on them for months at a time. There's only supposed to be 5, but quick bonus for the mini cactpot. Go to the gold saucer and just do it every day. You don't need to think too hard about it. My strategy is just to scratch them up like this, and if it's possible for there to be a jackpot of 1, 2, 3, I go for that every single time. The odds of earning jackpot appeal to me way more than worrying about maximizing an extra 100 gold coins here or there, or whatever they're called. What are they called? Gold coins? Put it here. Just put there. Those. Just swing for the 10,000s. Like, it's better than not doing it at all. In a lot of my previous videos, I've gotten questions where folks are wondering exactly which tools I'm using to do this or that. Rather than answer all of them individually forever, I figured it'd be a good idea to put together a list of all of the various websites and tools I use on a weekly basis. If you're a veteran and have been around for a while, you probably know the most popular ones, but if you're new and haven't been particularly active in the online communities, I hope some of these are new and useful for you. Since there are 15 of these in total, I'm not going to spend too long on each of them, but if a deep dive into specifics is something you'd be interested in, do let me know. Universalis is a trader's best friend. It's incredibly useful when figuring out the true value of something. You can use it to see sales history on your own server, to see whether the price is trending up or down. You can look at the entire data center to check if there's anywhere you can buy it for cheaper, or what the actual average price is so you don't overpay. You can even expand it to all the servers in your region. If it's a really valuable item and you're willing to jump to another data center for it, you could potentially save thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions. Teamcraft is easily the most intricate tool on this list, though the web version doesn't always work 100%. It has a variety of features ranging from a crafting simulator to gathering node alarms, currency spending calculators, and perhaps most importantly, community lists. These are lists of items which members of the community have put together. Whether you want to see a list of every item you need to craft a specific submarine part and find out where to buy the supplies or even if it's worth it, or if you want a list of every item you need to complete the entire Armorer class quest line. It offers a whole bunch of stuff, everything you can think of, from how to craft it to how much it's worth, or maybe you just want to see which items to buy to get the most money for your white scripts. It's got all of that and more. Check it out. Garland Tools is great for a variety of reasons. You can use it for node timers, of course, but the way I mostly use it is for figuring out leveling gear and endgame gear. For the former, you can simply input your current class's level, and it will spit out the best gear for you to put on and let you know how to obtain it. For the endgame equipment, it shows a progression from low-level endgame gear to the optimal endgame gear, giving you a nice path to work along. Super useful for people who are not familiar with endgame. FFFetch isn't 100% accurate, so make sure to use it next to a market board to manually check prices. But if you're ever unsure what to send your retainers out to gather and just want to narrow down the field of materials a little bit, this tool will return a list that provides the most skill per trip, which is super handy when you just want to earn some cash. One day I'll complete my sightseeing log, and when I do, I'll be using the log helper to do so. It tells you all of the locations you need to visit and when the window for them is open. Some locations require specific leather, which can mean waits of up to a full day. Thankfully, the time and weather requirements were exclusively a Realm Reborn thing, so after that, they are significantly easier. The Final Fantasy XIV market board website isn't super popular, which is honestly its biggest downside. The thing it offers that other tools don't is the supply ratio. In short, the website tracks how many of each item are currently listed and how much usually sell within a week. And it spits out that number as a ratio, showing how over or undersaturated the market is, which is really handy when you're trying to figure out what to sell. If flipping items is your thing, try Saddlebag Exchange. It automates a lot of the processes of trying to find items selling for less than their actual value on servers other than your own. That way you can pop over, purchase it, and then come back and sell it at a higher price on your own. There are a million different items to flip, so whether you're just trying to earn a couple thousand or you're flipping for millions and risking a whole bunch of gil, it'll help you find whatever you need to look for. Want to collect some mounts, emotes, minions? Final Fantasy XIV Collect maintains a database of every collectible in the game, including how to get it, whether it can be sold on the market board and for how much, and shows how rare the item is. It's a collector's paradise. The relic weapon grind sucks, we all know it. But if you want to track your progress and see all of the materials you'll need in advance so you can start purchasing them now using the various currencies, Relic Tracker will help with that. It's the only thing that makes the grind feel manageable for me, so I can actually see the progress that I'm making. If you're the type that wants to collect them all for a certain class or of a certain type, it also displays that progress on a handy spreadsheet. If you're uncreative like me and can't figure out how to put together a good glam, Eorzea Collection is a database of community-made glamours. You can browse the looks by class, race, or even by specific pieces of gear, find one you like, and make it for yourself. They also have a handy gear set section where you can see every set of gear in the game on an in-game character model. Tired of hunting for housing plots, visiting each one to see how many bids are on it? Check out PaisaDB, which helps speed up that process a ton. If you want to know more details, go to my dedicated video on Paisa. I've already done one. It explains everything and how it can save you hours of time when new houses release. Bored and need something to do? Check out Zib2Do's list of activities. You can track which dungeons, trials, raids, quest lines, and challenges you haven't completed. Like I said, handy when you just need to pick something to go do. If you're trying to complete your fishing log, don't struggle with, trying to figure out availability and locations. Just open this website and start checking things off. Some of these fish are so rare that they're only available like once a week. Honestly, it just wouldn't be possible without the help of websites like this, so make sure to use them if you're really into fishing. And finally, if you want to do S rank and A rank hunts, let a Discord do all the hard work for you. Sign up for Loop, pick your server, pick what you're trying to do, and it will ping you whenever one of them is live. No more waiting on someone to hop into your zone and start yelling about an S rank being live. You can even set up alerts for valuable fates that reward currency to buy exclusive items. I will say some of the servers like Ultros and Primal have dedicated separate servers that may be more useful and more tailored to you. So make sure to check out those. If you've made it this far, wow, thanks so much for watching. I know some of this content might seem a bit dated considering some of the videos released more than a year ago, but I wanted to get it all in one handy video for everyone to watch so they don't have to go searching for all of the information. I'd super appreciate a like or subscribe. If you want to support the channel even more than that, there's a Patreon link down in the description below. For now though, I hope you enjoy your Dawn Trail adventures, and I will see you next time.